So I have to say that this is something I've never experienced before in board gaming. And of all the titles in my collection, I wonder if it signals something with Fantasy Flight Games, if it signals a shift now that they're owned by just essentially a monolithic corporation. And many would say possibly it's a race to the bottom, even if that race to the bottom takes some time. I jumped in, some would say this is heresy, and purchased Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. I have the 1st edition. I love the 1st edition. I have the smaller boxes that I routinely and regularly play. Lurker, King in Yellow. A fantastic, fantastic gaming experience, no doubt. But in all of its glory, it's a little bit clunky. There's a little bit of bookkeeping going on. The board populates very, very fast, and it's easy to lose track of moving certain monsters. And now you're 2 turns down, and you didn't move those monsters, and you're like, well, what the heck do I do? Do I move them now? But that wouldn't really be fair for the activation. Do I take it back? The game is very complex in terms of what you have to keep track of. I was interested with Arkham Horror 2nd Edition because it streamlined things. It kept a lot of pieces of the game in place, but allows it to play faster. It also has different scenarios, and this is what really intrigued me, was the fact that I'm not just rushing around to close gates and stop some of the great old ones, or these kind of gods from other worlds, star gods. There's different missions, different scenarios. So purchasing in with that, the box, I don't think it's counterfeit. I really don't. I mean, the box looks fine. It's Fantasy Flight. You open it up, and the components are Fantasy Flight. I recognize the standees and the holders from the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I look at the boards. They look okay. The cards look absolutely fine. The cards are actually fantastic. Good card stock, good art. But then I get to the counters. And the counters, the sanity tokens, the money, the wound tokens, and other bits and pieces in the character stands, they just look a downgrade. Just a downgrade by like 2 or 3 points down in terms of printing, in terms of color, in terms of quality. Quite frankly, and I love Pathfinder the Adventure card game 2nd Edition, the cardboard tokens for that game were the worst that I've ever seen, and an absolute insult to pack in for a card game, a board game. But these tokens for Arkham Horror, and it's Fantasy Flight, so there's going to be a lot of tokens, they're not that far off. So my first thought was like, is this an Amazon knockoff? Is this a knockoff game? But in exploring it further, the packing is all the same. How the cards are packed up in individual bags is the same, and the other components and tokens are spot on, and the board inserts and everything. But just the tokens themselves, I won't say I'm a little bit disappointed. I'm a little bit surprised. So I wonder, with the shift of Fantasy Flight essentially abandoning many of their titles and essentially just going for Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, and the Arkham Horror files are big. I mean, there's a lot of games that have been released and continue to be released. Are they downgrading the components? It was just odd. And again, in all the games in my collection, all the titles in my collection, and I have a number of titles. I'm just looking quickly on my shelf here. I'm looking at like 10 or 11 Fantasy Flight titles. They all are very similar, and that's spanning over a number of years. This is the first one that just looks a little bit off.